Trae Young is just a few years into his NBA career, and he's already made a number of enemies, including an entire fan base. But we'll get to that one later in the video. For now, we'll be going over his brutal fight with Grayson Allen. He and Allen never seem to get along, and this feud has gone on for quite a while. So long that this fight is actually two parts. One fight occurred shortly after he was first drafted, and the other came just a year ago during a preseason game. It all started back in the Summer League between Trae and Grayson. The Hawks had the basketball down by 8 points in the third quarter when Trae wanted to give his team a spark offensively. He pump faked, got Grayson to jump into the air, and then attempted to shoot a three. The only problem was that Allen intentionally jumped onto Young so that he wouldn't be able to get the shot off, and chose to just foul him instead. The two got tangled up because of it, and Young literally threw Allen off of him and forced him to stumble. The second Allen regained his balance, he delivered a headbutt to the chest of Young before putting his arms in the air as if he did nothing wrong, which is kind of ironic considering the fact that he was the only reason this fight even started in the first place, right? Young continued to follow closely behind Allen, and they shared a few words to one another before the refs and teammates got in between them and got them pushed apart. Both players toned down the arguments for the rest of that Summer League game, but animosity is clearly still there for each of them. And that was evidenced by their most recent fight this preseason in the NBA. Memphis held a solid lead in the third quarter when Allen caught a pass around a Jonas Valanciunas screen. Young followed him around the screen very closely, but the two were bumping into each other on almost every step they took. Pretty soon after that, Grayson lost his balance while being tangled up with Young. Trae chose not to help him up and instead pushed him to the ground while he was stumbling. And this immediately caused a ton of players to rush in and try to defend their teammate. Dillon Brooks and Young both exchanged shoves with one another and could be seen yelling something while Ja Morant flew in to argue with Trae a little bit. Now, just to recap here, in about 30 seconds, Young pushed Allen to the floor, shoved Brooks off of him, and had some trash talk for Ja Morant right after that. I mean, talk about a few eventful minutes for Mr. Young. Though Trae has had quite a few other fights that ended up being eventful as well. This next one happened to come between Trae Young and Marcus Smart. If anybody's ever watched Marcus Smart play basketball, then you know how scrappy and physical of a defender he is. The Boston Celtics and the Atlanta Hawks were locked in a one-point game with just 40 seconds remaining. Boston held the lead and the ball and was hoping to further put this game away on the current possession. He drained a three right in the face of a defending Young, and while Smart was walking away, he was seen shouting something towards the Atlanta bench right before the timeout. A few more seconds ticked off the clock, and Trae had the ball down 2 points with under 10 seconds left. He attempted a three after a small crossover and was blocked by Daniel Tice. He fell to the ground pretty hard, and Smart picked the ball up and stepped over Young while he was on the ground. Trae put his arms out, and it ended up causing Smart to fall down in front of him. By the time Marcus stood back up, he had two Atlanta players up in his face arguing with him. Then, Young got up and had some words to say to him too, while also pleading his case to the referees because he thought he was fouled by Tice just seconds earlier. Surprisingly, it didn't take very long for the officials to sort everything out. They just called a simple common foul on Young for pushing Smart when he tried to step over him. Smart knocked down the free throw and the Celtics held on to win the ballgame. Now, Trae isn't somebody to get into fights for no reason, and stepping over him while he's on the ground about to lose a basketball game definitely seems like enough to warrant a response like that. However, this next fight was warranted a little bit differently. The Hawks were up against the Portland Trail Blazers about a year or two ago, and they held a big 16-point lead in the game. Trae Young took the ball up the court in a hurry after a missed shot by Portland. He got up to the three-point line, sized up his defender Trevor Ariza, then threw the ball between his legs and went to run right around him. The only issue was that Ariza had a pretty big problem with being nutmegged and didn't feel like going around on a highlight reel all week, so he pretty much body-checked Young out of bounds almost the second the ball went through his legs. Obviously, the referees instantly called a foul on the Grizzly veteran, but he wasn't done just yet. Ariza continued to yell and tried to walk over to Young about the attempted move. He even sent a small shove to one of the referees trying desperately to hold him back. Meanwhile, Young just stood there after the shove smiling and nodding like, "All right, I got you." He was also waving his arm in the air to try and hype the crowd up, and he was definitely able to accomplish that as the crowd got louder after seeing the replay. After further review, the officials actually handed Ariza a technical foul for his actions, and Trae knocked in the free throw to extend Atlanta's lead. I guess it's safe to say nobody should ever attempt to nutmeg Trevor Ariza again, or you might suffer the consequences. Similar to how Young suffered the consequences here against the Chicago Bulls. It was about halfway through the first quarter when Young was taking the ball up the court. There was a timeout called on the floor, and Young chose to just stand back and shoot a three to warm up, like a lot of players do. When he landed from his jump shot, Dunn chose to bump right into him. The two both turned around and started arguing a little bit, and that was when everything took a big turn for the worse, as Dunn reached out and slapped Young on the back of his head in order to get his attention again. Shockingly, Robin Lopez was the only player left to really get in between them and push them away, though another Chicago player jumped in shortly after. Play ended up resuming a little bit later, and Young was determined to make Dunn regret hitting him on the head. He pulled up from deep and splashed a three-pointer right in Dunn's face, then put his hands on his hips and stared Dunn down as he walked towards his bench. However, the referees then blew a whistle and actually handed Young his second technical foul of the game for that taunt, ejecting him from the current contest. So Dunn got the last laugh here because of that, but Young was in total shock that he was just ejected for something so minimal. You could see him holding his head just completely confused as to why he was thrown out of the game. I guess the referees wanted to make an example out of him because both him and Dunn wouldn't stop getting after each other. Just like how the New York Knicks and their fans kept attacking Trae just a few days ago. See, the Knicks were recently eliminated by the Hawks in the opening round of the postseason this year. Each team went at it, and there was a ton of physicality throughout the entire series. Then, one game in Madison Square Garden, Trae went up for a floater and just missed it. He fell to the ground as the clock expired for the first half. Julius Randle grabbed the rebound and threw it behind his back at Young, who was still laying on the ground. John Collins did what he could to stand up for his teammate as he pointed out who threw the ball and was even sharing some words with the veteran Reggie Bullock, who walked over to chat a little bit with Young. This probably could have been a much bigger issue had the majority of Knicks players not gone and left the court and headed into the locker room. Still, Young and the Hawks weren't very happy about the disrespect that was shown by Randle and other veteran players on the Knicks. But this disrespect went far beyond just basketball. Apparently, during the first few games of the series, Young was verbally harassed the entire game. The Hawks were being booed the entire time, but Young sank a clutch floater with a second left to win the game for his team on the road. He then shushed the crowd while he walked back on defense, prompting the Knicks arena to start chanting, "Trae Young is balding," for the entire second game of the series.
Like to be back in the postseason.
Though some fans took it too far. One guy was even caught on video spitting on Young when he was trying to inbound the basketball. Thankfully, that fan was eventually banned for life. The Hawks then won both of their games at home before returning to Madison Square Garden to wrap up the series. As they were winning and the game was coming to a close, there was a classic photo going around of Young turning around and smiling at the crowd while being relentlessly heckled by fans. He even shouted back, "Are you gonna spit on me next?" to one of the fans in the front row. Young may not be the most confrontational player in the league most of the time, but he sure has turned himself into the villain of New York after that series. Do you want to see more fights? Then click on one of the videos that appears on your screen now. And make sure to subscribe, but only if you enjoy watching NBA fights. And let us know below who we should make a video about next. We'll make sure to shout you out.